Good evening, spooks. My name is Jess, I put the J in JT Reads, and we are halfway through the year. We are halfway through the year and we have read 47 books. So we are well on our way to hitting our 75 books a year reading goal. And I'm not mad about it. But let me tell you what I am mad about. I am not trustworthy. Great start, right? Great start. The reason why I would say I'm not trustworthy when it comes to book reviews is because my mood and my opinion changes very quickly, and it's not that stable. It's not that stable, which kind of tracks for my entire personality and mental well-being. But that brings us to today's video, because I am going to re-review all the books I have read in the first half of the year to see whether my opinion has changed just based on memory alone, which also terrible. There are some books that stay in my mind that were 5-star reads, and I know they're still going to be 5-star reads, but then there are a couple of books that I've given 4 stars that I don't think I've thought about ever since. Are these genuine 4 stars? 4 is very high. Should these not be 3s? Should these be 3.5s? Have I given some things 3s that are actually really quite terrible? We're gonna find out. I have all the books stacked behind me, which you actually can't see because they're out of frame. I also have my spreadsheet where it shows me all of the ratings I've used, because we're not going to rely on memory for this part. Let's get cracking. We've got 47 books to get through, as I said. Well, I'm only going to do up to the end of June, so there may be a couple that I've read since then, and we're not going to go through those ones because I'm hoping my opinion hasn't changed that quickly, but we never know. So let's get going. We're going to have to move fast, okay?
Speedy.
We're going in order, starting with a book that I finished on the 1st of January, and that is, I'm going to have to stand here, starting with Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I rated this 5 stars. This is still a 5-star. It will be forever. I finished Garden Spells in January. I also rated it 5 stars. It's probably more of a 4-star. I think that because I was reading it in January, the vibes were immaculate. I had just had my Christmas break, so I was well rested. This was very cozy and whimsical, and I think I was just caught up in the emotions and also riding off that Emily Wilde high. So I think it's probably more like a 4-star. I then finished the audiobook Witches Get Stuff Done. I rated it 3 stars, and I think that is a little stingy, just because I think I had just finished Emily Wilde as a 5-star, then Garden Spells, which I said was a 5-star, and then I listened to an audiobook which was a witchy romance. And did it give me witchy and romance? Yes, it did. So why am I being so mean? So I think I'm stingy, and I think this should be a 4-star. It won't be a 5 because the author uses the word nub in a sex scene. Nub. I then took Pine out from the library and I rated it 3 stars. I don't really recall much of this other than it was okay, so it's definitely still a 3-star. I then listened to The Woman in Black, and I listened to the Audible version, so it was extremely atmospheric. It had background noises and it was a totally immersive experience. I rated it 4 stars, and I think I was probably rating based on my audiobook experience. I think if I actually was rating the book based on the content, it's more likely to be a 3-star. I then read Small Worlds, and I borrowed it from the Libby app, and I rated this 3 stars. I remember it being okay, but does not live up to its predecessor of the book that has entirely slipped my mind, so I'll just put it here. It wasn't as great as this one, and so I stand by my 3-star review. Then in January, I read Never Whistle at Night, a collection of short stories. I rated this 4 stars, and I remember it being quite difficult to get through. I was very slow getting through this, and I think it sparked me falling out of love with short stories. But I did rate it 4 stars, and I would stand by that because I did really enjoy the stories. I think it's more of a reflection on my preferences, in that when I was getting into a story, it then would end and I'd be disappointed. But that shouldn't really drag the rating down because it's not the author's or the editor's fault. They made it quite clear it was short stories. I knew what I was getting myself in for, but I would finish a short story and then be like, oh, that was a short story. Well, what did you expect, Jess? What did you expect? So it remains 4 stars. Last up in January, I read Big Witch Energy, which is the sequel to Witches Get Stuff Done. I did actually rate this one 4 stars, so I obviously recovered from the first book where nub was used, and I would stand by the fact this was 4 stars. I wanted a witchy romantic time, I got a witchy romantic time. In February, I borrowed Medusa, from the library, and I rated this 3 stars, and it was very not memorable. So I would stick to my 3-star rating. I have definitely read some incredible Greek mythology retellings, and unfortunately this just wasn't one of them. It was fine, but I think the story made it fine, and the story already exists, so 3 stars. Next up in Feb, I read A House with Good Bones, and I rated it 5 stars. I have absolutely no desire to change my review. This is 100% a 5-star read. In T. Kingfisher we trust. I then read Clap When You Land, and we were on a roll because I also rated this 5 stars. And I think that when I read a novel in verse, I get very caught up in the beauty of how it is written and less so in the story. On this occasion, that was not the case. This was a 5-star read, 5-star story, 5-star writing. It shall remain a 5-star. Then I read The Witches of Varda, so fun to say, and I rated this again 5 stars. And again, I am not changing my review. I think this is one of those books that I raved about for a long time after I'd finished it, so that tells you something. There are some books that I still rave about to this day, even though I read them years ago. 5-star forever. This will be a 5-star forever book. Next up in February, I read the sequel, Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. I rated it 5 stars, which won't shock anybody, and it also won't shock anybody that this is remaining a 5-star read. This will be, like Witches of Varda, one of those books that I talk about forever. I'm going to make it my whole personality. I am so excited for the 3rd book to come out next year. 5-star forever. This feels like a great opportunity to tell you that I got this special edition from Fairy Loot, and it is so beautiful. Can I just show you the end pages? I know I said I need to make this quick, but I can't not show you this. It's so beautiful. Next up in Feb, I read Before Your Memory Fades, and I rated this 2 stars, and I think I was being generous. I feel unbelievably cruel rating anything a 1 star because work has gone in to write a book, and I think that shouldn't be ignored. But honestly, this was a rinse and repeat of book 1 and 2. I did not find it enjoyable. It lost all of its whimsy and cozy feel that the first book had, and I couldn't connect with any of the characters. I didn't feel like they were well-rounded characters. I just felt like they were very 2D. So unfortunately, this is going down to a 1 star. Next up, I read Near the Bone, and I rated this 4 star. And I remember that there is one thing that's left very unanswered, but not in a cool, quirky, speculative fiction ending. Just in a, did you forget that you wrote that part? Which is why it came down from a 5-star read, and I'm gonna have to stand by that. It's so close to 5-star, it really is. I loved it. I whizzed through it. It was so enjoyable. It was dark. It was brooding. It was fantastic, but there was one thing very much left unanswered, which I needed to know. So it stays at a 4-star. Still a very good book though. Next I read We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and I rated it 3 stars. I did really enjoy this book. I remember really enjoying it, and I think it's maybe the disconnect because it's a classic and quite old now, but I think it's going to remain at 3 stars. It was very good, but not quite 4-star good, you know? 3 stars. Next up I read the graphic novel A Guest in the House, and I rated this 4 stars because I am cruel and I am stingy, and this is a 5-star read. I think the problem I had is I picked this up after I had read Through the Woods by the same author, and that blew my mind. It was so incredible. So I think this felt tiny bit pale in comparison, but if I hadn't have read Through the Woods, would this have just been a 5-star? Yes, it would. So we're getting rid of that prejudice of I read something better by you before, and it's going to be a 5-star read. Next up, I read My Throat, An Open Grave, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. And I remember why. It's because I was expecting a horror and it was a dark romance. So I think I rated it quite harshly, when actually it was maybe just a marketing error. If this was marketed as a dark romance, I picked it up expecting a dark romance, it would have been a 4-star read. So we're going to ignore the marketing issue on this, and this is going to be a 4-star read. Hi. We've made it to March. Well done for sticking around if you did stick around. If you've left, then you won't know I'm saying this to you. But now you're going to miss me talk about this really good book that I read, which was Feybound, and it was a 4-star, and it's still a 4-star. Is there a second book coming out? I could research this before I ask you, because in the time that I record this, edit this, and post this, I could have just Googled it, but I'm not going to. So if you know that there's a second book coming out, please let me know, because I would like to see where the story goes. I assume it's part of a duology or a trilogy because it's left on a cliffhanger, but yeah, 4 stars remaining. When I decided to do this video, this was the one book that I was ready to re-review because I was harsh. I read Exit West and I rated it 3 stars. And I think I was just stroppy because it's a literary fiction, but it started off with a little bit of magical realism element, and I was so hooked by it that I wanted more and more and more. but that wasn't the point of the story. And I think I focused so hard on that lacking that I missed that it was just a really, really good read. This is definitely a 4-star read. Next up in March, I read And Then She Fell, and I rated it 4 stars. I definitely knew what I was talking about that day because this is, of course, a 4-star read. It's almost encroaching into 5-star territory. I would still say it's 4, but it's not far off 4.5. Maybe when I re-review at the end of the year, it will turn into a 4.5, but it's one of those books that has stayed with me for 3 months, so Alicia did a few things right then. Another book that I haven't stopped raving about since I read it, The Invocations. I rated this 5 stars and I was not wrong. This is, as I said earlier, a forever 5-star. Plus the cover, the everything, the content, the cover, beautiful. 5-star forever. Next up, I read Demon Copperhead, and I rated this a kind of generous 3.5 stars. Did I enjoy this? No. Can I appreciate that some people would enjoy this? Yes. I think that's where I went with 3.5 stars, because I was like, this isn't written for me. I am not the intended audience, so I always feel very unreasonable rating it low because the author did nothing wrong. I knew what I was getting myself in for. I just read it knowing I probably wasn't going to like it. So I'm not going to be too harsh, but I am going to bring it down to a 3, because a 3 for me is a this was okay, and this was okay, but for me, I did not enjoy it that much. But I see why people do. I've been preparing myself for this one too. What Feasts at Night? I rated this 2.5 stars, and I did talk about it a lot in a previous vlog because I love T. Kingfisher. I was so hyped for this book to come out because I loved What Moves the Dead, but this was painfully disappointing. And I rated it 2.5 stars because I love the author, but there were so many plot points that I just really did not like. It felt very cliche and just, yeah, overall just disappointing. I'm gonna pull it down to a 2-star. It's not 1, that feels unreasonable, but it is a 2-star read for me. Welcome to April, where I kicked off the month reading Starling House, and I rated it 4 stars. I don't know why. I think I was caught up in the fact that this was a beautiful looking book. The content was fine, but it's a 3-star. I don't know why, I was just feeling fruity that day. It's a 3-star read. Next up, I read No One Rise for Free, and I rated it 2-star. I rated it 2-star because there were so many errors in the writing, because the author deliberately wrote and edited and published this in 10 days. And it shows. So unfortunately, if this had been written not well, because the author is a good writer, but if this had been written with care and attention that it deserved, it would have been a 4 or 5-star read. But no, it was so unbelievably painful to read because of the writing. The content was exactly what I was expecting from a extreme horror. It was extreme and it was horrific, but not as much as the writing. It's staying at a 2-star. I'm so disappointed in this one because she has such a good story on her hands. She's a great writer. Why would you do that to yourself and to your readers? 2 stars. Next up, I read Ruin and Rising, and I rated it 4 stars. This one was so much better than the second one, so I am standing by my 4-star rating. Thank you very much, Lee Bardugo, you have blessed us. Next up, I listened to Nothing Burns as Bright as You. I rated it 5 stars because I meant it. 5-star read. Again, this was a novel in verse, and like I said earlier, sometimes I'm so caught up in the craft of writing novel in verse that I don't focus on the story, but this was a queer coming-of-age romance that just packs a flippin' punch. 5-star forever. Next up, I read This Is Where We Talk Things Out, and I rated it 3 stars. It's gonna stay that way because it's a good story, but I did see the plot twist coming, and I never see plot twists coming, so that's saying something from me. But it was an interesting read. I liked the concept. I liked the execution. It just isn't gonna stay in my brain very long, although I do recall everything that happened. But we're sticking with 3 stars. Maybe we'll re-review at the end of the year. Then I read The Game, and I rated it 3.5 stars. I don't disagree with Past Jess. It was a very interesting read. I think the difficulty in rating was that it's a children's book. So to say, oh yeah, it was fine, 2 stars I guess, because it's a children's book. Why would I do that when I picked up a children's book knowing it's a children's book? So I have to rate it on the fact it is a children's book and not my sole enjoyment. But it is very well written, very interesting, so fantastical. Mythology weave through the whole book, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's almost a 4-star, I'd say, but 3.5 for now. Next up, I read The Hollow Places, and I do not have my copy, so have this, because I've lent it to my friend, who is currently physically reading the book, and my other friend is listening to the audiobook at the moment. that would suggest I enjoyed this book. I rated it 4 stars, and I think I'm being harsh. There was only one part of it that I didn't quite like, and that's when the main character is trying to figure out what is happening. They have this big internal monologue, which I just found a little bit boring, when there was an amazing side character that Kingfisher could have utilised, so it just got a little bit slow in the middle. So I'm going to keep it as a 4 star because I think it's almost a 5, but just that one part was very hard to get through because it was boring. But otherwise, fantastic book, recommend it to pretty much everyone, so 4 star. Next up, I read Godkiller and I rated it 3.5 stars. I think that's pretty fair. It was one of those books where it was enjoyable, so we're already pulling away from a 3 star. Not quite incredible. I haven't and wouldn't probably recommend it to many people, so we're pulling away from a 4 star, and so rightfully so it sits right in the middle at 3.5. I am interested in picking up the sequel, Sunbringer. I have it on my shelf. Do I? Yes. Somewhere. Why can't I see it? Why can't? Oh, it's right there. Okay, it's at the top of the shelf. I am interested in picking up the sequel, but I haven't yet, and I think that says enough as to why it's not a 4 star. 3.5, and it's staying there. Next up, I read 10 minutes and 38 seconds in this strange world. Hard title to remember. I don't have my physical copy because I have lent it to my grandma. I think she's going to love it, as I did. I rated it 4 stars because I'm a monster. This is a 5-star read. It stayed in my mind ever since, to the point where I have now lent out my copy, which doesn't happen very often, as I said with the Hollow Places, with 10 minutes. I recommend it to people if I think they're really going to enjoy it, because I really enjoyed it. 5-star read. Next up, I read My Beloved Ariadne, and this is my friend's copy, but I have tabbed it. So I have bought my own copy in hardback form and tabbed it again. I need to return the other copy, sans tabs. But this was a 5-star read, and it is remaining a 5-star read. As I said earlier, this is a forever 5-star. With Greek mythology, I think that the author has such a challenge in taking this story that already exists and putting their own spin on it and making it interesting and making somebody who already knows the story want to read it. I think that is no mean feat, and this definitely belongs way, way high up on my list of favourite books I've ever read. Ariadne is a 5-star forever. Next up, I read Crossroads and I rated it 4 star. It's a little horror novella, and it definitely deserves to continue to be a 4 star. I don't think it was quite horror enough to make it a 5-star read for me. I was intrigued, but I wasn't creeped out or spooked at any point. Some of the descriptions were very good and very uncomfortable, but for the most part, it was just a very good read, a very quick read, and a little spooky read. So 4 star, it will remain. Next up, I listened to When I Hit You and I rated it 4.5 stars, again, because I'm a monster. This is a 5-star read. The only book this year that has made me genuinely tear up in both of my eyes. Sometimes I get like a little welling in my left eye. Emily Wilde made me slightly well in my left eye. When I Hit You made me, I think a tear might have even fallen. We're not messing around when tears fall. This is a 5-star. A fantastic book. This is a 5-star incredible read. Next up, I read Before the Devil Knows You're Here and I rated it 3 stars. And yeah, that's where it's gonna stay. It was okay. Again, this was a case of it being marketed as a horror, but it wasn't. It was a dark romance, or kind of a dark romance. I'm not really sure what it was. It was a kind of fantasy, kind of slightly spooky, with romance elements. I'm not really sure where you'd pitch it, so I guess that's why they went for horror. But it wasn't a horror, and so I couldn't shake that disappointment. But for the most part, there was no suspense really built, because you were given the supposed antagonist, you were given his POV, I think maybe the 2nd chapter in, so there was no suspense over why he was doing what he was doing or how this happened, because he told you himself, and that was annoying. So it's going to stay at 3 star. Next up, I read The Wolf Den, and do you know how hard it was to find a copy of this? I read this via ebook. It's got a tassel, and it was near impossible to find a actual physical copy, especially because I wanted a hardback and not a paperback, because I've got the 2nd and 3rd book in hardback form, so they need to match. It was so difficult. I ended up getting an old library book, you know when they, what's the word, redacted? Withdrawn. When they withdraw old library books because they're a little bit damaged. That's where I ended up getting this from. Wow, it was a struggle, and it wasn't that cheap, which is annoying, but it's because I rated it 5 stars and it's going to continue to be a 5-star read. I'm very excited to pick up the 2nd book. This is probably going to be a forever 5-star. I then read Bloom and I rated this 4 stars. I don't know why, because this book has stayed with me. Not only is it so beautifully written at the start, the descriptions of everything before it gets spooky are so stunning, and then when the spookiness hits, it has stayed with me, especially the ending. I still think about the ending to this day, so this is definitely now a 5-star. Next up, I read The House Witch and I rated it 3.5 stars. Since reading this, I have tried to pick up the second one, which I actually own the physical copy of. Don't know where it is though. And I DNF'd it because it was boring and slightly problematic. Only mildly, but mildly's enough. And it feels like it's going to bring down this rating just because I now feel a certain way about the author and the series isn't going to get completed. So it's very hard for me to confidently say this is still a 3.5 star. I think it's more likely a 3 just because I now know where it's going. That might be unfair, but it's 3 star. What are you going to do? Congratulations, you have made it to June with me. We are now in the last month of the first half of 2024, try saying that quickly, and I read Stardust, kicking off June with Stardust, kicking off June with a little 4 star. And yeah, I would agree with that. It's again one of those things where I'm reading a children's book, so I'm not the intended audience, but that doesn't mean I didn't have a very nice, cozy, whimsical time. Neil Gaiman is kind of hit and miss for me, but this was a hit, and I'm sticking with my 4 star. Then I read Castle in the Air and I rated it 3 star. I don't really know why because I didn't really enjoy it at all. There were some parts of it that were very problematic and it was marketed as a sequel to Howl's Moving Castle. Howl and Sophie only feature in maybe the last 20 pages, 10 pages maybe. So I'm dragging it down to a 2.5. It wasn't really it for me and it's made me not interested in picking up the 3rd book even though I want to know what happens. I don't know who it's going to follow anymore. Is it following the main characters in this who I don't like? Or is it following Howl and Sophie, which I would like to read about? I guess I'll have to read it and find out, but this is coming down to a 2.5. Next in June, I read The Borrowers and I rated it 4 stars. Despite now having read the 2nd book and finding a few problematic issues, this is going to stay at a 4 star because The Borrowers, as in the 1st book itself, I found very enjoyable and didn't find problematic. I did listen to the audiobook, so I could have missed something, but as far as I'm aware, it didn't feel problematic. It's going to stay hesitantly at a 4 star. Next in June, I read The Silence Factory and I rated it 5 stars. And if I could give something a 6 star, well, this would be it. I loved this and will definitely be sticking with my 5 star. This is, as we say, 5 star forever. Amazing book. I even bought The Betrayals by the same author because I've read The Binding and again, that was a 5 star read. So I'm thinking, hey, we're probably on track for another 5 star here. And I don't know when she's next releasing a book, so I need something to fill the void that has become my life until another book from Bridget comes out. Okay, oh, I found the house switch. Bye. Next in June, I read The Book That Wouldn't Burn and I rated it 3 stars. And yeah, it's gonna stay 3 stars because it was fine. It did not need to be this long. It was interesting. The concept maybe was interesting, but the execution wasn't that great. There was so very little description of this massive, beautiful library, and I came here for library descriptions. I wanted to get all up in my dark academic fantasy era, and I was disappointed. So it's staying at a 3 star because I can appreciate that it was written well and the story is interesting, but I don't think I'm going to pick up the sequel, especially if it's as big as this. 3 stars. Last in June and last book for this video, I wish we could end on a slightly higher high, although it is a kind of high. We'll get there. I read the 2nd book in the Borrowers series and it's The Borrowers Afield. I rated this 4 stars, but as I said when I read The Borrowers, I then realised there was some questionable content. It's a little problematic in some areas. It's a difficult one to pigeonhole because it's a product of its time, which as we've said before is not an excuse, but it's very hard to rate and review. But I do have an entire video coming up soon where I go into this in more detail, so look out for it then. For now it's going to stay at a 4 star. It may go down to 3 at some point, but for now let's keep it at 4 and we'll catch up at the end of the year. Or in the video that I have coming out soon where I go into more detail. But that's a secret right now. To summarise, I've read 46 books in the first half of the year. I said I've read 47 so far and I technically have, that's because I just finished one. So we re-reviewed and re-rated 46 books. My average rating was 3.9. So very high. We've had a good year so far. Didn't feel like it sometimes, but it has been a good year. After my re-review, my average is 3.8. So what we can deduce from this is I am extremely trustworthy and you should listen to all of my reviews in the future because I am reliable. I am a great rater. I'm a grater. Not grating. I'm not grating. Please don't say I'm grating on you. We can address that too if you like in the comments, I guess. But if not, as always, if you have any recommendations for books that you think I will think are 5 stars based on my reviewing history, please let me know and I will let you know whether I think it's a 5-star or whether it's a dud. It's not personal though, it's never personal. Thank you so much for watching and I'll catch you in a video very, very, very soon. Or probably next Thursday because that's when I usually release them. Okay, bye! Let me show you